Okay, I just saw your thumbs up. All right, so everyone can get to this page. So if you can click into this first playbook one and click start. And then I need to kind of get some of this stuff out of the way so I can see. All right. So it should come up fairly quickly. Looks like mine's got like 30 seconds or something. Normally they're more like 5 minutes, so it is a lot faster. But one of the things that we want to do is we're going to build a basic playbook, and we're going to talk about check mode, which is a way of running your playbook without actually applying the change, which is very useful if you're not 100% confident in what the outcome of running that playbook is going to be. So we'll see that demonstrated as well. Okay, so you should have a start at some point. And then you'll see that your page will look like this. So there's a couple of things that you need to do to kind of set up your environment. So that's why I was recommending that everyone kind of follow for the first lab to kind of work this part out. So one of the things that you don't have on your screen is a terminal. So if you see terminal, if you can see what I'm doing on my screen, there's a terminal here at the top of the code server. You're going to want to click on that and click on new terminal. And then what you should see down here is an actual command line terminal that's under the folder that says code server. So that's one portion that you'll need to work with. The other one is this terminal, the second tab, browser tab. This is how you're going to connect to the actual router that's in this environment. Put that down there. So if we need to SSH to a router, then we'll use this terminal. So code server is normally when we're doing something with the playbooks. And you'll notice on the left-hand side, it's already opened up to some existing playbooks that have been kind of pre-started for you. And this is under the File Explorer area. So if we want to modify a file, typically we'll do it here. It's easier than doing it in the terminal of the VS Code, because there we would have to use like a VI editor or one of the other editors that are available in Linux. Where here we can just modify files directly. So we'll go ahead and open up this playbook .yaml file here. So if you just click on it, here's the contents of that playbook. And you can also see it in your steps as well. One thing to note, this has nothing to do with Ansible. It's more the actual lab guide. It's not always expanded. So it also has a scrolling as well. So make sure that if it's not expanded, that you've expanded each section as we go through and do all the things. And then make sure that you scroll all the way down before you click on check. What will happen is if you miss something, then it's going to complain that you need to fix something. And if that annoys you, you can always skip to the next section as well. But I would encourage you to finish each section of a lab. So this is the initial playbook. So let me scroll back up here. And if we run this playbook, it's going to configure the router, because the default when we run a playbook is run mode, or the default when we run it as a Ansible Navigator would be run mode. So it'll make the change. But what we want to also take a look at too is like, what's the existing state of the router? So to get to the router, you can SSH to just Cisco. So that's this terminal, the second terminal. So SSH to Cisco. And it brings up your router prompt. And then you can either follow the way that they're looking at the configurations, or whatever's comfortable for you. But what you want to make sure is that there's no existing SNMP. Right, so I is for includes. So if you do a pipe and I, it'll include anything in the running config that was SNMP. And then S is section. So sometimes I get more robust response with section versus includes, but that's really just up to you. But either way, it's enough to show you that there's not an existing SNMP configuration at the moment. So we go back into our VS Code, and VS Code is from Microsoft. This happens to be the type that can run inside a browser. So it's called Code Server. So we have these, these two line items right here. And the way that this works is if we look at this, right, just a recap, here's our play, the name of it. The host is pointing into an inventory, so just a Cisco router. And then gather facts is no, because we don't really need any of that. So what happens is if you always gather facts, it takes extra time. And it loads that configuration. It comes back. In this case, it would just be the default iOS facts would come back and it would load it in memory. But we're not doing anything with the facts. So the best practice is to turn it off unless you want to use it. And this is an iOS collection or iOS XE. And we're using a config module. There's an alias for this. It's also iOS_config, or in this case, they just call it a config. An alias is more than one name for the same thing. Just like there's an alias for commands, or commands is an alias, lines is like the main name, or you can call it commands. But effectively, either way, what it's doing is it's sending configs at the config T level, right? So they would go in just like they do from command line. Now, this is more of the non-abstracted way to build a playbook. When you use config modules or command modules like to do show commands and things like that, this requires you to know more about the actual syntax of the device that you're configuring, which is okay. When you use resource modules, though, it's more parameterized and it further removes you from the need of knowing command lines, which is great for like multi-vendor, right? Because if you think everything around Cisco versus Arista or whatever your frame of reference is, you don't have to worry about knowing all the low-level details of the command line. So we're going to go ahead and what it's going to ask us to do here shortly is it's going to want us to run this playbook. So here in step 3, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we're supposed to run it right here. So you can copy this if you don't want to type all this stuff. And your page should work. If it doesn't work, I've seen weird things where you had to do Control V. Mine did work just from right clicking. So here's the format, right? So instead of Ansible dash playbook command, it's Ansible dash navigator. And then the run parameter, and it's the name of the playbook. So playbook YAML is what we opened up. And then dash dash mode is standard output. So when we run a playbook from like old school Ansible core engine, we get standard output. But with Ansible Navigator, you can either have standard output or you have this TUI that you'll see an example of that where it's like inside a menu and then you like drill into things that you want to look at, like artifacts and things like that. So here we're going to just see it like old school playbook. And since we're running this the first time, we should see a change. So when you run a playbook is idempotent. And idempotent means that the first time you run it, if it doesn't exist, it'll make that change. If you run it a second time or more and the configuration does exist, it's like a read-only config. It just leaves it alone. And then it'll just move to the next task. It only changes what it needs to change. So there is some level of state in how it works against the configuration on the actual running device. So I'm going to click on this and let it do its thing. So you can see that we had one okay because the task ran okay, and then we had one changed. And the changed is because it applied this configuration. So if we go over to the other terminal up here, and I'm still logged into the router, when I run that command this time, we can see that we have those two public and the private community strings are in the running config. So the next thing that it's going to want us to show is just running it again, right? So we can see that there's no need to apply that configuration the second time. So if I pop back over here and just up arrow key and run my playbook a second time, we should just receive it okay, not a change, right? So just one okay. And if you validated yours, then just go ahead and check it, and it should bring us to the next steps. So it takes a few seconds, and then once you see start, you can keep going. Okay, so here's our playbook again. So at this point, we already talked about it being idempotent. Modify the playbook. Okay. So now what we want to do is we want to modify this playbook. So in order to do that, you can copy it out or type it if you'd like. And we want to add one more line. So we get a dash in there, paste it in, and just make sure you have it all lined up, because the indentation does matter in YAML. This one may not have all the linting tools in this lab, but I would suggest installing those extensions in your VS Code too, the Ansible extension, so you can see, like, whenever you're out of syntax, it'll show why, or if you just need to move things over a bit, because your indentation is messed up. So we have this here. In terms of saving this, I think the version that we're using here on the web version of VS Code automatically saves, but just in case, what you can do is just do a Control S, or you can always do a file save here. So you can just make sure you have saved changes. So we've modified this playbook, but what we want to do this time before we run it is we want to use this check mode. So that's just another argument that we can set in Ansible Navigator or in our automation controller in the GUI with job template. When we run a playbook, we can turn that on there. So that's just to say, like, we're going to run this. We want to see what it's going to do, but we don't actually want to make the change. Another thing we can do is turn on our verbosity. And I think if I scroll over, they have that turned on. Yeah, so there's different levels of verbosity. One level of verbosity will show the data in the config. So we'll go ahead and do that so we can see the actual config that it wants to or would send to the device. So this is check mode. So it's going to say that it's changed, but it's not really going to change. Right. So right here, and because verbosity is turned on, we can actually look into the payload here, and we can see that the command that we want to send. Right. So here's what we added, this Ansible-test. And then here's where that command is. So the module wants to send this command. And it says change, but it actually did not change because it's check mode. And the way that we can verify that is to go into the terminal. I've lost my connection, so I need to SSH back into that Cisco and do show run section SNMP. And you can see that I only have those 2 entries. So it didn't apply the 3rd entry. But if I up arrow key and just leave the verbosity so we can see it at that level and take the check mode out, by default, it's run mode. All right, so that says change, but to verify it, oops, click in here, up arrow key. Now we have the 3 entries in the router. And then I kind of skip expanding these, but this is pretty much showing all the same stuff. Right, so the big takeaway really is, if you're not comfortable, or really just as a best practice, you should run a lot of these playbooks in check mode just to get an understanding of what would change and look at that data output and make sure it's doing the thing that you think it is, and before actually running it. One last thing I'm going to do, because the lab's not asking me to do, but I just want to make sure, just so you can see the difference, is we keep running these in standard out mode. If I take that away, it'll run it in the TUI. So that's what this is doing. So it's giving us output, and we can see that it succeeded. But for me to, like, actually investigate the output, I have to go through the TUI. So everything is like indexed items. So 0, if I click there on 0, then I go into like the playbook itself. And then I go further deeper into it. You can see in YAML representation, like the output of that playbook. So let's scroll down somehow down here, I guess. I kind of want to make this bigger and move it up. There it goes. Yeah, so here's like the actual playbook output, and it's all in YAML. So you get like all the information as an artifact. So it saves this into a particular file that's defined in the Ansible Navigator configuration file, and you can always go back and look at this if you'd like. But for the most part, it's easier, like for like human readable, for me just to look at it from standard output. You should be able to escape out of here. Yeah, and then you go back to your terminal. So we'll click check here and see what else is left in this lab. And I think, no, that was it. Okay, so that concludes lab 1.